Welcome to Classroom 5.0, a podcast that uncovers industry insights, cutting-edge research, and practical evidence-based strategies that help us all to imagine and design learning environments and pathways for this ever-evolving world, so that together we can best support the next gen to uncover and deliver their unique potential. This episode has been recorded from our hometown of Port Macquarie, which we're grateful to share and enjoy alongside the traditional owners of Beer Pie Country, whose ongoing cultures and connections to lands and waters we celebrate, and whose elders, past, present, and emerging, we pay our respect to. I'm Marianne Power, psychologist and co-founder of the Posify Group, and your host again for today's episode on Classroom 5.0, which I'm so thrilled to be joined by Tracey Taylor as our guest today. Tracey is, hand on my heart, one of the kindest humans I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. And we've only just met, and I can already claim that. And you will see for yourself by the end of this episode why I think that is the case. But just quickly, a brief intro for Tracey. So Tracey holds a Master of Education Leadership from Macquarie University and brings 25 years worth of education experience in both teaching and leadership capacities, including Deputy Principal at Steiner School, School Principal at Michael Park School, and most recently, School Director at Samford Valley Steiner School. She also served as CEO of Steiner Education for 6 years, but today you'll see that she has taken on the role of Director of Education Policy at Independent Schools Australia. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar or who might be joining us from outside of Australia, Independent Schools Australia is the national peak body responsible for representing the interests of our independent school sector on a national basis. So they do really good work in relation to Australian government funding and representation on a national policy making bodies and all the good stuff involved with the big decisions. Tracey, congratulations first and foremost on this new and exciting role. But before we dive into that and everything else that I'm keen to explore, that's your very impressive professional bio. I want to know for our audience, what makes Tracey tick? What are your interests? What brings you joy and sparks inspiration personally?
Well, I think, thanks, Marianne, firstly, for inviting me. Meeting you at the conference the other week in Melbourne was a delight. Mm-hmm. I think what inspires me is education, because it's the future. It's the future for all of us, for society, for communities, and for children to have a great start in life. And there's such a huge picture around education, starting right from early childhood and going right through to university and postgraduate, and people who want to reinvent themselves at the age of 50 or 60 and do different degrees. So I just think education is something that inspires everyone, and it's a community responsibility, a social responsibility. So I just feel privileged to be in this sector. It's amazing.
Well, we're pretty privileged to have you. And I would say that in hearing that makes sense. You're a walking, talking example of somebody who takes their true internal and intrinsic purpose and makes meaningful work out of it. So thank you. Yes, we did meet at EduTech. That was such a brilliant conference in so many ways. And your talk and your presentation with Suzanne Carrington, who we've actually had on our show, the episode before this, for listeners who are just joining today, definitely go back and listen to Professor Suzanne Carrington. We're going to get to that work together soon. But the other point that I just was so privileged to connect with you on was the personal journey that you shared about your son. And I wondered if you'd feel comfortable sharing a little bit about your son's journey and how it's helped to shape your, your lens of education and learning.
Oh, absolutely. I could wax lyrical about that forever. So when my son, I've got two sons, one's now 36 and the youngest one is 31. They both inspire me. And my youngest son was diagnosed at 2.5 with autism and ADHD. And at the time I was I was running a business that was 7 days a week, a general store, and studying, and had a 5-year-old and who was 7 at the time. Then said, I was told my son had autism and ADHD. And I thought, I was actually relieved, because I thought, right, now I know how to understand his world, because I was pulling my hair out. I didn't know why he was nonverbal. He was doing things that weren't the same as his older son. And I just thought, there's something there. And so rather than be devastated by it, I just thought, what an opportunity to understand what his world is like. And he has been my greatest teacher. I was studying to be a teacher at the time, and I was going to be an English teacher in high school. Then I decided I would be a primary school teacher, and then I thought I'd be a special ed teacher. But in the end, I ended up being a Steiner teacher and managed to combine all my passions for English, special ed, the arts, primary, all into one, and help other children who had autism as well. But my youngest son started, or just be a brief story because it could be a very long story. He started at a state school in a special ed unit. And I remember he had a teacher, she had an Irish accent, and she said with him, you just have to pick your battles. And it was something that was a great thing for me, even as a teacher, pick your battles. So if anyone out there is listening and have got a child who's a bit challenging, pick your battles because you actually need to win. And there's no point going halfway through the battle and then giving up because then the next time the battle will be longer. And it was the best advice she gave me. So I would always do a stock take of myself and think, have I got the energy to deal with this behavior at the moment? And if I didn't, I would just ignore it because there were behaviors after behaviors after behaviors. But that meant I could be consistent because if I picked the battle, it was to the end. So it was a wonderful thing because then my son really understood what was expected, and he learned really quickly that, you just couldn't push. That's the end of the line. And I think today for young parents, that's really hard. They really struggle to find out where that end of the line is and, give another chance and another chance. And so that's why I say he was my best teacher because, his behaviours sometimes were so extreme that when I did become a teacher, I thought, really? No, that's nothing. I've seen much worse than that. And
right at home.
and I just always thought that it's like you're a detective. What's the reason for the behaviour? And that's the role of a teacher, not to give punishment or anything, but clear expectations and then think, well, if we're not fitting the child, we can't expect the child to always fit with us. How do we fit the child as well? It has to be a two-way street. And I think that's where education is really exciting at the moment with inclusion, because every child has the right to be included. And that's another passion of mine. So part of the journey which we spoke about, which I think you want me to touch on, was how do you prepare a class for a child that's coming in that might have challenging behaviours? And so I told a story to my son's class when they were 7 and I said it was about a puppy dog. And this puppy was coming to join the litter. And sometimes he just loved rough and tumble play. And sometimes he didn't. He was such a big oversized puppy. He sometimes didn't know where his paws were and he might, push or something like that. And I said, but all he wanted to do was be like all the other puppies. And they said, who are you talking about? They switched because I was a teacher at the school. They said, are you talking about your son, Brock? And I said, yes, I am. They said, we can't wait to have him come to the class because they just saw him as this puppy who just wanted to make friends. And I think story, which is a really powerful tool for educators, that's where you build empathy and compassion. And if you can do that, I didn't give away anything, didn't say he had autism. He didn't even know that because he was 7.
So little.
Yeah, but giving also the children tools of what to do because they want to include their friends, but sometimes their friends can scare them with behaviours that they might not be used to or that might be loud or sudden or things like that. Yeah, that's probably that in a nutshell.
So reshaped my thinking personally as well, because I shared with you, we've had our own journeys with both our children who are both neurodivergent, and particularly our youngest, who kiddo tends to be a little bit more externalized in how he presents in the world, and finding a way to respect his way of seeing the world and moving in the world, and also recognizing that just like every other young kid, he's still figuring it all out, right? And ditching the label and turning to story, And the way that you did that to bring people in, I just thought it was just, it really touched me personally, and I hope that it resonates. I'm sure it will with our listeners. There was something else that you shared. I hope you don't mind me asking, but I just found it so fascinating, is how you spoke to the children, generally speaking, about the idea of triggers, and that triggers aren't specific to our neurodivergent population, but that actually if we all get to know an understanding of what sort of pushes our buttons and pushes others, what that kind of language helps to shape.
Yeah, and I think, with children, you don't call it triggers anyway. I think it's like ABC. So I always think of what's the antecedent, what's the behaviour, what's the consequence. So what's happened before the behaviour? So yes, what triggered that behaviour, but what happened? And then how can you try and eliminate some of those triggers so that the behaviour doesn't escalate? And then what's the consequence from that behaviour? It could be that the consequence is something the child really likes, so that could increase the behaviour. It could be something that they don't. And it might be that consequence is really wrong because you actually haven't understood what the antecedent is, the A, ABC.
Yeah.
So I think for children, for them to know, if a child is screaming at them in their face, it's okay to say, please stop, you're hurting my ears. So you just try and give the children language that sounds normal. Sometimes I see in schools that says, this is what you say and this and that. Stop, I don't like it. And the children become robotic and they go around the playground going, stop, I don't like it, stop, I don't like it. But just saying, actually, you're hurting my ears. Could you please speak in a quiet voice? And actually, that's not really normal language that a child would say, but that was something I always said to my son. And he's now 31 and a teacher aide in a school and doing amazing work with children with a whole range of needs. But I still, at 31, say, where's your quiet voice? Because he doesn't always have volume control. He said, Mum, you know that's something I still haven't quite managed, but I'm working on it. So it's, I think children just want to, every child comes to school wanting to learn and do their best. No one walks in the school gate thinking, I'm going to have a really bad day today and I want to be horrible. They all are trying to fit in and learn and they want to have fun. And so the more that you can make it fun, the more that you can make it a little bit predictable, give them routines and rhythms so that gives them a sense of security, then it's actually really helps that whole inclusion picture, really does. But teachers need support. They need training. They need extra physical support, extra eyes. It needs resourcing. You can't, and that's why to be an inclusive school, it's got to come from the top. It's got to come not only from the board, if it's from independent schools or the system, it's really got to come from the top, and then the school principal or leader, the whole leadership team, because you can't just expect the teacher in the classroom to sort it all out for themselves. And that's why I think a lot of teachers actually fear inclusion because they know they're not resourced well enough to do it. And so they don't want to fail the children in their class. Every teacher goes to school every day to do a great job. And if they know that they've got a child in their class and they know that they may not be able to manage that because they've got 25 or 26 others that also need that need, we can't expect them to be miracle workers. We've got to give them what they need so they can do their job. Just like an engineer or a pilot who flies a plane, he can't do that without everybody else around him. It's the same with a teacher teaching a class. They can't teach without all of the support and the resources that they need to do the job well.
Absolutely.
Really passionate about that too.
Oh, and it's funny because I just I recorded earlier, and it'll be for episode 1 for this season again, Zach McCura, and we were talking about the importance of mattering and the piece around resilience, and so much of the languaging being that resilience puts the onus on the individual without necessarily taking a look at the environment and the system that the individual is working within. And what I love about all that you stand for and all that you're doing to educate others is that piece around how can we upskill our leadership teams and the people who really can move the needle to adjust the environment so that there is more equity and there is more inclusive practice that comes naturally. And I have to say, from what you were sharing just now, I was personally giggling because that whole turn the volume down is something that is constantly in our house. And full disclosure, it's not just me sharing that with my son. It's often other members of our family saying, hey, mum, turn the volume down. As a neurodivergent human myself, so I had to have a giggle. But what I love about what you're sharing is the return on investment when we look at these kids and the different ways of adjusting and speaking quite explicitly on the behavior that's not working for us and actually why it's not working and what we'd like to have differently. I heard you say, please don't yell at me. It's hurting my ears. Please, could you speak lower? Is one, really respectful. Two, it's so direct, you can't misinterpret it. And so what's good for the very literal and matter-of-fact neurodivergent brain is by its very nature very good for all of us. But I'm curious to hear, given that we can, I hope, agree on the benefit, if you like, of these practices. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you did with Dr. Suzanne Carrington at Samford, looking at bringing the leadership team under your leadership at the time along on this inclusive journey and what you found in the process?
Sure, Marianne. And that's a great segue, actually, because what I just said before, it's a wonderful vision, but it's really hard to achieve because you have a whole range of people in your school who have different views, and also you have huge amount of call on your resources. So when you're school principal and you're looking at the budget for the whole school, staffing is just 70 to 75% of budget. So the rest of it has to come from
somewhere,
the smaller pie, and that includes everything else. So you need your board on side to start with if you're an independent school. And then you actually need to get everybody else on side because it's almost like a huge cultural change, inclusion, to be a totally inclusive school. And it's not just getting the board or the leadership team or the staff on side, it's also the community. It's other parents in the school who might say to the teacher, well, I don't want that child in my child's class. But they have every right to be there. So it's not a simple picture. It's very complex and multi-layered. And so I had heard Suzanne Carrington talk at another conference a few years ago, and I grabbed her card because I thought, wow, she has a lot to say on inclusion. And I found her card 2 years later, and I said to my board, I really want to do a research project in our school involving as many staff as possible with Suzanne about how do we transform leadership in the school, and not just the leadership team, but every teacher as a leader, every teacher assistant as a leader. How do we lead an inclusive school? And so then they said, all right, investigate. So I spoke to Suzanne and we came up with a plan of a 6-week course because, as everyone knows, you do a PD course and you go to that, you might be the only one at the PD course, and you come back to your school and you've got all these great ideas, but no one's with you. You haven't got a team around you. So the first thing I ever learned about cultural change is you need to create like an emergency. And you say, we have to do this because it's so important. And so that's what I tried to do, was say, this is so important. Who would like to come on this journey with me to learn more? And so that everyone was empowered to actually come up with ideas to try. I wouldn't say solutions yet, but ideas to try of how can we do that together. And 23 staff put their hand up to do this for 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I think it was successful that we had so much buy-in, and we had probably about 10 teacher aides do that. It was after school, and so I put it on the usual faculty meeting day so that it wasn't another add-on for teachers. They just missed faculty that day, and we caught them up by reports or emails. And the teacher aides came because we paid them to come. Teacher aides are only paid till the school bell. And so I really wanted them there. So I said, put in a timesheet. So value their time. because without having the teacher aides there, and I don't even like the word teacher aide, and so that was something that we discussed. What can we name it? Should we say education assistant? Because otherwise it looks like it's just that the teacher aide's there to assist the teacher. But actually they're not. They're there to assist children's learning.
Yeah.
And that was the shift I wanted to bring in the school, was that teacher aides aren't there just to put up paintings and wash out the paint jars. The teacher aides are actually there to help assist the children to learn. And that we need to value their experience and value. They are, and they've got so much to offer, but people don't often ask them. So that was the crux of that research, actually, was building an inclusive team. And so we called them the Inclusion Champions, and it's their job now. And because I've now taken the role at Independent Schools Australia, I'm not there to see it through, but my successor, she was already on our leadership team. She's very keen to see it through. So I know the work is still going on, and that it was the first start. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And I just wish them all the best on that journey, and I'll be definitely keeping in touch with them how it's going, because if they can find a great model that works for an independent school, that's not a huge independent school, not it, I would say an average size, average income independent school. If they could find a model that works, that's something they could share, which would be amazing. And I hope they get Suzanne to come back and keep working with them.
Hey there, I wanted to tell you about an exciting and innovative solution we've been designing to help solve this problem of how we best prepare the next gen for an ever-evolving world and future workforce that's going to demand a whole new set of skills and mindsets in order for them to thrive. The Posify Academy is Australia's first student-led, evidence-based and curriculum-aligned wellbeing and career development platform, helping young people aged 10 to 14 uncover and deliver their unique potential. It's the first of a trilogy series that's helping young people move seamlessly and with confidence from education and into industry as they design a life and a career of impact. Teaching skills like communication, compassion, creativity, critical thinking, agility, curiosity, resilience, problem solving, all those human capability skills that we talk about here on this podcast, and connecting them with a sense of purpose. To learn more, you can visit theposifygroup.com.au/posify-academy. Now, back to the show. Well, as it stands, it's funny because you and I also collided on the fact that my young one has just started at Glenelg in the Sydney Steiner School here. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about that, but I've already got in my mind, I'm going in to chat with them about a few things this afternoon. Have you met Suzanne? Because, I mean, they're doing such beautiful work at our school. I just have nothing but every day. There's not a moment in the day that goes by, I was sharing this with you, that I'm not eternally grateful for all the educators that have crossed our paths, but particularly, this particular community and this particular school, the humans there are just, they're off the charts. But I actually wasn't overly familiar with the Steiner philosophy until we started really digging around and looking for alternate avenues. And then when I came across it, I was like, oh, far out. It speaks entirely to our family values, our vision of life and the future of education, learning and work. For others who might be a little bit kind of maybe curious and not really sure about Steiner, from your experience, how would you describe Steiner's philosophy in both its differences, and I think what's important is probably its similarities as well in terms of how we have education practices here in Australia and worldwide?
Great question. When I was the CEO of Steiner Education Australia, people would ask me that exact question. And they'd say, what's the elevator speech? You know, Steiner in 3 seconds.
I'm asking for the elevator pitch. I hope it didn't come across that way.
No, it's because it's almost impossible, because there's so many.
It's very multi-layered.
Steiner education.
Yes.
It is. And so my advice to people is, you actually have to feel it. Go and visit a Steiner school and feel the difference.
Yeah.
So I'll talk first about the similarities. The similarities is every Steiner school in Australia is a registered school run under their jurisdiction of their education department. They have to follow all of the regulations that every other school has to follow.
In terms of curriculum and what is taught.
We meet all of the Australian curriculum requirements. but we meet them at different times. So we got highly involved in developing the Australian Steiner curriculum framework when the Australian curriculum was in development. And we worked closely with ACARA, who's the national body that develops the Australian curriculum, to get alternate recognition, because Steiner education was seen as an internationally recognised curriculum. And at the time when Julia Gillard was Education Minister, she gave ACARA the remit to actually find a way to keep international curriculum in Australia. So that was like Montessori, Steiner, and the IB, International Baccalaureate. So that was, over 10 years ago now, and that was great because all of the Steiner schools actually got together and worked really hard to develop our own Australian Steiner curriculum, because there were slight differences around the country, and there still are, which is healthy. But basically the crux of the difference, I would say, is that what's taught is deeply embedded into the needs of the developmental age of the child. And it's taught through the arts. It's taught through story, through movement, through painting, drawing, and drama, bringing a story alive with drama. And even maths can be brought alive through geometry and the arts, and the relationship of maths to music or to science or to botany. There's so many correlations, and the curriculum's got such a deep wisdom in it. It's like a cyclic curriculum. It spirals up and up and up, but it's always going back and revisiting something else. So in class 5, the students learn botany, but they also learn it in class 11, but it's at much different levels. So in class 5, they'll learn about the mosses or the ferns or the fungi or the pines or the flowers, and they'll learn it through story. And they'll learn it by going out and observing and growing things in the garden, doing or singing songs or poetry about plants and their relationship to animals and people. And it builds on from the farming main lesson in class 3. But then in class 11, they're looking at botany from a very scientific viewpoint, and it's a totally different way. But because they've had this richness in the primary years, they're so engaged in learning in their high school years. And one young man, we always would get at the parent information nights, we would have alumni or students in year 12 come and talk to the parents, because it doesn't matter how much you try and say how wonderful Steiner education is. It's really, when it comes from the students themselves, it's different. And so I remember this one particular information night, I'd given the general view of Steiner education, and our early childhood, primary and high school directors all gave a picture of it. And these two year 12 students had come to talk about it, and they came early. We usually would invite them after we gave all our talks. They came early and they actually heard all of that. And I get goosebumps every time I talk about it, because they came up to the microphone, both of them, and they just looked at us and they said, wow, that is so true. That is exactly what we experienced. And we didn't realize just how cool that all was.
That you actually thought about it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And this young man said, I'm going to go home and thank my parents for what they've given me, because I didn't actually realize until we've started speaking about it. And to me, that was gold, because, Steiner schools aren't out there to sell themselves as the best education. Steiner teachers are there because they know it works. And often things come out in education policy about the value of the arts to help numeracy, or the value of music, or the value of outdoor education in building resilience and problem-solving skills and team building, cooperation. We've been doing all that for over 100 years. And I think Steiner education now is actually starting to use much more contemporary language that fits in with all the research. So the research is actually backing up what we do, which is fantastic. And we need that. It's the 21st century. It's not 1919 anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some of our listeners who have perhaps got that more education lens as they're hearing and are curious, and that's not my background, by the way. My sister co-founder is our education representative here at Possify, so I'm definitely catching up. Mine's in psychology, but I can think of, and correct me if I'm wrong. For me, inquiry-based learning comes to mind. For me, co-design principles come to mind, innovation and creativity. And for anybody who's sort of imagining, as Tracey's talking, an environment where the kids are free range and they're out and about and they're picking the garden, absolutely, there's opportunities to be out and about. But our experience has actually been that at least at Gleneen, it's very structured, but in a way that recognizes and respects individual needs, which has just been amazing. And the relevance, for us, with neurodivergence, that piece is huge. Is if my kids don't see the relevance of what they're learning and how it relates not just to them today, but who they're wanting to become tomorrow, you've lost them. It doesn't matter how intelligent the teacher is or how interesting the curriculum is. You've lost them. So I'm curious to hear from you as well, Tracey. Now, obviously, taking your experience in Steiner, such a rich experience, and now into Independent Schools Association, your work in terms of education policy. How are those two merging, colliding, bashing up against one another? What are your hopes for the future of education policy? I'm so curious.
My vision for education policy is that it actually meets the needs of the children instead of the needs of the big business or
Systems.
political agendas. We all know that education has been a political football for many, many years. The last election, it wasn't so much, which in a way I think was good, because there's a lot of new things on the horizon that are coming, which I think will actually be good reforms, because some of these reforms that are coming, there's been a lot of consultation with teachers and principals and people on the ground. And that's what I think is important. We have to have diversity in education, and that's why I think being with Independent Schools Australia it fits in with all of my vision and philosophy, because I've always believed in diversity. And in the independent sector, there are so many different schools.
Yeah.
There's faith-based religious schools. There's the grammar schools. There's the small community school. There's different philosophy schools like Steiner and Montessori. There's the IB schools. There's something for everyone.
Does
And
homeschooling
I'm
fit
not
into the
also not
independent sector,
denigrating
or is it
state
separate again?
education. There's amazing teachers out there in state schools as well. And I think sometimes they are more hampered. With an independent school, the school principal has a certain amount of autonomy, so you can actually respond to the needs of your community, maybe in a quicker way or in a more responsive way. So, I've sort of gone off track a little bit to your question, but I think that's the crux of it for me, is that there isn't any collision of vision, because to me, education is about the needs of every child. So when we are looking at policies, and I'm there to represent the whole independent sector, I'm not there to represent Steiner schools, I'm there for everybody. And I respect all philosophies and all needs, and deeply respect people who are working in education. So I feel really privileged to be, at the seat of some of these tables where these discussions are happening. It is a privilege. And
Yeah, I
hopefully the
wonder if
experience I've had can help.
I mean, we're very privileged to have you there, quite frankly, and I think anybody listening will agree. There'll be lots of hope and optimism for the future. I'm curious to pick up on something you said a little bit earlier in terms of that political ball game for education and your observation that potentially that's changing. What are you noticing in terms of a shift, if at all, that's moving away from the systems-based focus to more of what I'm hearing your hope being around that student-centric or human-centric and designing up from the grassroots up? What changes are you noticing?
Well, I wouldn't say we're moving away from a systems focus, but
Okay,
I think the systems are trying to focus more on the actual needs of what's happening in schools,
got it.
but not always. not always. It's, I think that the dilemma that I see is that schools are being asked to fix all the ills in society. And so every time there's something that goes wrong or there's an issue in society, schools have to fix it. So we keep talking about overcrowded curriculums, and version 9 of the Australian curriculum is less crowded. But there'll be more and more things that will be put on that. So that's my concern, is the workload for teachers and the pressure on students. So if teachers are pressured to rush through a crowded curriculum, we need depth and breadth. And we can't have breadth and shallow. It's got to be both. And so how do we do that? And they're the discussions that we need to have. And I think you get the depth by an integrated curriculum. Like you said, if the students can see that the maths they're learning is related to their music lesson, or their history lessons related to their English lesson, or their camp or excursions related to what they're learning in the classroom, there's this integrated way, then we can teach smarter instead of keep adding on. But there are agendas there, and really good ones from different organisations saying, well, teachers need to teach this because we need this for a healthy society, we need this for positive well-being, and we need this for mental health outcomes, we need this for academic outcomes, we need this for physical outcomes. And it's not that we just keep pushing down all the way to kindergarten. Because then all the pressure's already on the young child at kindy to learn this and learn that. And then we're having the rise of mental health issues in young children is phenomenal. It's staggering. And that's what we need to address. Let's take the pressure a little bit off kids and teachers so that learning is fun, so that we do have lifelong learners. That's what we want. We want young people. All of the rhetoric from business and economists say we need lifelong learners who can change, who can be flexible, adaptable, resilient, problem solvers, great communicators, great collaborators. That's what we need. So how can they do that when they're totally focused on only academic outcomes or an ATAR score? We've got to have holistic education to have whole human beings. And then there's the whole issue of artificial intelligence. Our role as educators for the future is that we need to become increasingly more human to push up against a technological world, which has all the advantages. I'm not putting it down at all, but we need to be ethical. Because we'll be, the young people of the future will be in decision-making capacities of things that will be vital for the future. And so that's the role of education.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your whole human focus that shines through in everything that I've seen and read and heard you speak to. And it's reminding me again of our experience with having the guardians and the mentors at school, which is just so beautiful. I mean, we know from the science in terms of changing or really significantly moving the needle on well-being and positive health outcomes for our children. Yes, the interventions are important and there is some explicit learning that we can do, but with the biggest effect size, a meaningful conversation with an adult who shows a young person and helps them to understand how and why they matter is off the charts. And so I'm curious to hear from you how you're reimagining, instead of it being curriculum, in terms of fostering a whole child, what is the role of mentors, of guardians, of equipping our educators with comfort around how they can have these important conversations with young people and play that human part?
I think it's time. Like every person I know in a school would love to just sit down and chat to the student. How are you going? How are you going? I heard you were going camping on the weekend. How was that? Did you have a good time? Or I heard you're having a really hard time at home, that your mum's sick. Are you okay? Things like that. And it's about having the time to have those conversations Like the professional teaching standards say, know your children and how they learn. To me, it's know the children and how they learn and what's impacting on their learning. And if you know as a teacher what's impacting on a child's learning, then you know them. And that is the beauty of Steiner education. That is different, is that you have the same class teacher in primary school from year 1 through to year 6, 7, or even 8. As an ideal, of course, life gets in the way. That doesn't always happen. But that is traditional in the Steiner school. And in the high school, there's high school, the class coming into high school usually gets a guardian or maybe 2 guardians, might be a male and female guardian, or it might be just one. And that guardian isn't the year coordinator or the academic coordinator. They are like the pastoral care guardian. It's their job to know the kids and to, it's not always about giving advice. Sometimes it's just about, you want to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And just go for a walk and listen. Connect.
Yeah. And as you're talking,
in schools, sometimes you're the really significant other in a child's life if they're having a tough time at home.
Absolutely. And I'm also hearing that voice of reason that you mentioned earlier of there's a lot our educators are needing to do right now. Do they have this extra role of being that person? And I want to use this as a call out to community. Let's bring back our presence of parents and friends committees, and what role can industry do also in coming in and supporting our communities. Within the school community, there are so many rich opportunities for us all as parents, as professionals, as whatever role we play in our community, coaches, to come in and to support. And I just wonder what it might look like. I'm going to leave that as a light bulb for everybody to riff on. But what might it look like if we extend upon our learning places being schools and be co-contributive in that way? But Tracey, I could talk to you all day. I'm so conscious of your time and that you've joined us having just got off the plane to Cairns. So thank you so much. You're not only the kindest human, but one of the busiest ladies I know. Is there any message of hope you would like to leave, or a thought, given I've just left mine, in the minds of our listeners as they're starting to imagine the future of learning, work and leadership?
Yes, because I'm the most optimistic person. I always believe in a positive future. And I just think that it's about relationships and building positive relationships with everybody that you meet is the hope for the world, whether it's the Uber driver, whether it's the person at the security going through the airport. I said to a lady the other day, you're the happiest airport security lady I've ever seen. And she went like this, we just went bang together.
That's
she said,
beautiful.
Thank you. I try to make everyone's day great. And I just thought, that's what life's about.
You saw
and
her.
It starts from a baby, just all the way through. It's the opportunity of everyone you meet to try and have a positive interaction.
I love that. Tracey, where can people follow up with you and continue the conversation? How can we find you?
I have a LinkedIn profile and I have Twitter. That's probably the best way. I wouldn't want to give my email address out because I already have a lot in my inbox.
Brilliant. Twitter is the place to find Tracey. I love that.
Twitter or LinkedIn, definitely. I'm sure you can find me.
Definitely. I'll be sure to capture that in our episode page, of course, with all the resources and links to everything that Tracey has shared today. Thank you so much for joining us. And for our listeners, that is the end of another episode.
Joy.
Oh, it's just a joy talking to you. I could seriously sit here all day. Oh, it's another time. Exactly. Another time. Yes, please. I'll take you up on that. That's the end of another episode of Classroom 5.0. For our listeners, thank you very much for joining us. As always, until next time, we'll see you later, alligators. Classroom 5.0 is brought to you by the Posify Group, a socially conscious education company arming the next gen with a sense of purpose and the future skills they'll need to thrive in this ever-evolving world. Your ratings and reviews really mean the world to us. So if you loved this episode, please let us know and share it with a friend. We'd like to say thanks to our editing guru, Clint Rands, and his team at My Video Producer, who helped us put this show together and who have kindly sponsored Season 3 of Classroom 5.0. And for today's show notes, links, and more episodes just like these, you can visit thepositifygroup.com.au/podcast. Thanks for helping us imagine alive the future of learning, work, and leadership. We'll see you next time.